Time for your Louisville preview. We'll also hit on some other things that came up across the Syracuse wire from the other day, including some updates with Judah Mintz. We'll get to some of that with the top 50 guard for this class of 2022. Syracuse could potentially have a six-man class. We'll get into that, what it all means. Also, this is the popular successor, Rick Pitino. There's news on that front as well. We'll get into that as well as all of our Louisville thoughts coming up next.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome in. This is the Locked On Syracuse Podcast. Tyler, Aki, Tim Leonard. Happy Friday to everyone who's listening to the show. Thanks for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, like the video on YouTube. Give us a comment too. We love hearing what you guys have to say about the show. Also subscribe to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, wherever you get your podcasts. We're there with you. All right, let's get into a couple of things. I want to start with a tweet that we got, and you can find us on Twitter at @LO_Syracuse. This is from our guy, Zach McKiddish. He tweets at us. He is the leader. He carries the torch for Sienna Joe. But he tweeted at us. This is something that I tweeted during the game from the NC State. I said, something worth noting here. This was at a point in the first half, probably like 8 minutes to go, 4 minutes to go, something like that. Something worth noting. NC State has already played 6 guards in this game. Syracuse only has 3 guards on their roster. And that got into the whole Judah Mintz question. And Zach tweeted at us, how many of those NC State guards are leaving after this year? DePaul can't be a real threat for Mintz if NC State has 100 guards. Shouldn't this be a 2-man race between Cuse and Wake? And then he says, do you guys know offhands or the means to figure it out for the pod tomorrow? I have no idea. I'm going to bed. I just don't see a need for 7 guards on NC State's roster. And we said, you know what? We'll look into that. We'll dive into it, see what we think for the Friday show. So what do you think when you hear, okay, NC State's played 6 guards in that game against Syracuse? DePaul's DePaul. And you can say what you want about DePaul, but DePaul is DePaul. And then you've got Syracuse and Wake. Do you feel like it is a 2-team race for a guy like Judah Mintz?
No, there's also West Virginia, and it's still early, right? I mean, I know it's late, but it's also early in his sort of I'm back open discussion after decommitting from Pitt. I think NC State, based on the fact that he visited NC State, he visited DePaul, you have to consider them threats. I did bring this up, though, how NC State does have a lot of guys that are set to come back. To answer Zach's question, it's kind of tough. I mean, first off, they played 6 scholarship guards because they really only had, I think, 8 scholarship players available for that game due to some injuries and stuff like that. So they were sort of forced to go to a smaller lineup, which favored Syracuse and Jesse Edwards in that game. The other thing is, a guy like Smith, their point guard, is an elite freshman that's really coming into his own. Could he be a guy that leaves for the NBA draft? I'm not sure. Sebron is an all-ACC player. Does he come back next year? Doesn't seem like he's getting a ton of NBA buzz. Thomas Allen's a senior. That's one guy that has really haunted Syracuse. He's one of the guards off the bench. I don't know how much that would factor into a Judah Mintz decision, but he probably has eligibility. So it's tough in this day and age. Who's leaving? Who's going to hit the transfer portal again? Like Casey Morsell just came over from Virginia in the transfer portal. I do think it's worth noting, though, that when you're Judah Mintz, you evaluate those things. And it's not like NC State is head and shoulders above Syracuse. If anything, they're in a worse spot in terms of convincing him we have a spot for you, which is a plus for Syracuse.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the most important thing on the head. It's late, but it's early. Because it still seems like there's a little less than 2 months for Mintz's timeline here. And a lot can happen in that period of time. I mean, we've seen Syracuse swoop in and take care of a guy in a matter of weeks. So for a guy like Mintz, if someone else were to get involved, maybe someone decommits, maybe someone decides they want to go play for the G League or Overtime Elite or something like that. Like, so much can happen over these next month and a half that I'm with you. I think it's early. I will say this about let's say it is down to the 4 or 5 teams right now. and let's say that there are no outside pursuers, I wouldn't discount DePaul. They've got a new coach in there, comes over from Oregon, a really strong recruiter. Like, Oregon got good guys, and Tony Stubblefield was a big reason why. So I wouldn't count out DePaul in that regard. I would not count out Wake Forest, like you said. And in this era of the transfer portal, kind of like you alluded to, who knows who's going to be on that roster from NC State? Like, it's 6 guards now, but we've seen a Syracuse lineup with 5 guards on the roster, and then the next year they've got 3. So the numbers can trim quickly, and I would not count out a single team. I think all of them are viable options for a guy like Mintz.
Yeah, and then you get in, if you really want to get into the weeds, Sebron 6'7", 180. I don't know if he necessarily is technically a guard, right? Like, he's listed as a guard, but I feel like if Sebron comes back and your Judah Mintz is a 6'3", more natural combo guard, you can both coexist in an offense. It's not like he's taking away your position.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point too. All right. The other thing we want to hit on real quick, and we've talked about this name a lot as a potential Jim Boeheim successor. It is Rick Pitino. The fans love him. At least whenever we put out polls, people are always calling for Pitino as the next successor for Syracuse basketball. But he is in negotiations right now for a lifetime contract with Iona, the old Coach Cal treatment here for Rick Pitino. And so he's coming up on 70 years old. He won his 800th career game at Iona. He wants to win his 1,000th career game at Iona. And I mean, his name, you heard Jeff Goodman talk about it, how he's got ties to a bunch of different schools in South Florida that he could potentially go to. But he's in negotiations now to go back to stay with Iona. He's got a 5-year deal there. And I kind of get it from his point. Like, you're 69 years old. He loves where he lives right now. I mean, you're the big golf guy on the show. Like, he lives on the 3rd hole at Winged Foot so like, that's a prestigious country club, and he loves his life there. So I see why he would want to stay. Once you get a certain age, you don't necessarily see a need to change per se. And I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I guess the pushback is if you're into golf, maybe just head down to Florida. That'd be a little bit more appealing. Year-round schedule and all that.
Yeah.
So I think that was interesting when Goodman brought that up on our show. If anyone missed that, go back and check out our conversation with him, because it was really interesting to get his perspective. I don't think he even considers Rick Pitino an option. And when we come out and say we'd like Rick Pitino to be the next head coach, we also fully understand that that's very unrealistic. And then seeing this news makes it feel even more unrealistic. But the thought of Jim Boeheim at the end of his career saying, you know what, I'm still healthy in my mind to coach, but Rick Pitino, who is, let's say, in 2 years, 71, and Jim Boeheim 78, and he's kind of been a peer of mine, I think he would do a better job, so I'm going to give it over to him. Like, the only way that I see that happening is if it gets really bad here and Jim Boeheim is pushed out the door after 2-3 years of just a disastrous run. But I don't see that happening. So I really don't see Rick as the next coach, although if I was John Wildhack, I think he would be a very intriguing name for sort of confidence in resurrecting the program here.
Yeah, I think you need to at least make the call. You do.
Yeah.
And that, again, we see this stuff all the time. Is this a negotiation ploy too? For maybe there is another school that is interested, and all of a sudden they see lifetime deal, Rick Pitino. That it could always be a negotiation ploy. Like, look what Jim Harbaugh did at Michigan. Like, that entire thing was a negotiation ploy to get more money from the University of Michigan. So another thing too is, I mean, you got to think from Rick Pitino's lens as well. Iona is the one that gave me my chance to get back into the game. Like, I know he was coaching in Greece, but coaching in Greece is a lot different than coaching in the NCAA. And for Iona to give me my chance to get back into the game, like, you have to remember that stuff. There's a loyalty factor in a lot of these things, and I think Rick Pitino is someone who values something like that. So that's another little news and note from the week of Syracuse. I know that was a popular name that was being thrown around, but it is looking less and less likely in what was already a very bleak situation, but something that certainly was worth exploring. So we will get into the prop shop and all that stuff, get you ready for this Louisville game. But first, BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Football continues its march through the playoffs right to the big game in a couple weeks. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games as well. So don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers for the 2022 season. Get in on all that action, including the Syracuse-Louisville game, which we'll preview in just a little bit. Bet online where the game starts.
Also want to tell you guys about an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. It's called GetUpside. Our listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free GetUpside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use the promo code SCORE, SCORE, for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first fill up. Cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using GetUpside. Just download the app for free. Use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free GetUpside app. Use promo code SCORE to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE.
Also want to remind you, it is Super Week, brought to you by GetUpside, and there's no better place to get coverage of the big game than the Locked On NFL podcast. Also, Locked On Bengals, Locked On Rams are in LA all week covering the game. So be sure to get your Super Bowl fix on with the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, time for the prop shop here. Good week for both of us. Great week for both of us, in fact. As you look at the finals from last week, we each go 4-1. Your only mishap was on the leading score. You went with Buddy. I actually hit that one, and I took a long shot on Jesse, and NC State demolished Syracuse on the three-point barrage. So you won on that one. Meanwhile, I took the loss there, but we each hit on Syracuse to cover, and we each hit on the over as well. That was a pretty tasty over too. I think we were set with like 6 minutes to go in that one. So, all right, let's run it back here. Who will lead Syracuse in scoring? The odds are pretty much stagnated from last week, and why wouldn't they change, really? Buddy, minus 145, Gerard, plus 350, Jimmy, plus 350, Swider, plus 495, Jesse, plus 550, and other, plus 1,000. You know, that was a great race last game because everyone was within 3 points of each other between 16 and 19. Basically, the starters, the guys we essentially list odds for. But those five, what do you see out of that? Who do you like to lead the Orange in scoring against Louisville?
So I was thinking Louisville is not a team that forces a lot of turnovers. I feel like that plays into Joe Girard's hand a little bit, but I don't know if I'm confident enough to take him. I'd almost rather take a Swider or a Jesse the way they've been playing than a Joe Girard at plus 350 just from an odds perspective. But, you know, it's tough because every time I do this, I consider the other options, and then I think, you know, I'll just take Buddy because it feels like Buddy is going to be in the mix, and 6 to 7 times out of 10, he's going to be the guy. And we laid it out like 9 of the last 12 before the last game. He's led the team in scoring. So I'll still take him even though it's minus 145.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we'll see another big time Buddy performance in this game. It's like whenever he doesn't have one, he comes back with one where he gets like 23, 25 points, something of that nature. So I'm going to tail Buddy with you on this for the leading score. Next up, Joe Girard, a points prop for him. 14.5 points for Joe in this game.
So I looked at Girard's stats the other day. He's averaging 13.3 points per game. His shooting splits, you know, I've always been holding out hope for the rare 40-50-90 for Joe Girard, or sort of mix it up from the 50-40-90. It doesn't look like that's going to happen because he's 40 from the floor, 41% from three now. That's dropped down a little bit, and then 90% from the free throw line. But that's still pretty good. The issue is 89th out of 93 players right now in the ACC in turnover rate. He's averaging 3.0 turnovers per game. So I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue against the Louisville team that sort of lost its way, doesn't really pressure, just hasn't been very good on the defensive end. I mean, their defensive metrics are better than their offense, which is kind of crazy because they're 86th on KenPom D, but their offense is 178. I'll take Girard with an over here, and I think he scores somewhere in the neighborhood of 16, 17 points.
Yeah, I like that. I do think that just looking at some of the splits here, he does struggle shooting. I shouldn't even say struggle. He's much worse shooting from 3 on the road. And like you look at his numbers, like his home numbers are ridiculous shooting the 3. He's 51%, 29 to 57. Meanwhile, on the road, and I'll even lump in some neutral site games here, he's 20 of 58, so about 35% on the road, and then 8 of 21, 38% at neutral, which are still really good numbers from 3,
right?
But they're not the 51% he's shooting at home. So I'm gonna go with the under of 14.5, and I think this could be. You brought up how Louisville's not a team that's gonna force a lot of turnovers as well. Like, Joe was really good at facilitating last game, and I want to see him build on that. He ended up having 8 assists in this game, only had the 1 turnover as well. So if he can build off of that performance in that regard too, I almost think that's more important than him going out there and scoring 15 plus points. So I'll go with the under, but it doesn't mean I think he's going to have a bad game per se.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's had 2 straight Syracuse Joe games. Can he have a third straight, right? Like, it doesn't feel like that's possible. Sometimes it feels like he has to throw in a bad one now.
Absolutely. All right. 0 bench points last game. We're going to be a little more optimistic towards I guess you could call it bounce back. 6.5 is our bench points ledger that we're setting for this game. What say you on 6.5 bench points?
Well, I thought one thing that was interesting from the coaches' show last night is Jim Boeheim hinted at the fact that Symir Torrance told Jerry McNamara during the game that his legs didn't feel great, like he's maybe struggling to come back from injury a little bit. And I don't know if that contributed to him playing less minutes in that game because Joe was playing pretty well already. So that's something to factor in. I think I'm going to take the under here because I feel like Louisville's not going to necessarily force the Syracuse starters out of what they want to do. I feel like you have to be more of a pressure-oriented offense. And, I think Syracuse is sort of clicking on the offensive end in the past couple games. They're in the Dome. I just see, if anything, we see Frank Anselm, Symir, Benny come in for their spot minutes in the first half, and then second half it'll be, barring some Jesse foul trouble, mostly the remaining portion will be just the starting 5.
And like you look at the bench too, and you bring up the stuff with Symir, and it's not like Symir's scoring a ton, but of the bench players, he's still the leader of the pack, I believe, or at least it feels like it game to game.
And he's averaging 2 points a game?
Yeah, like 2 or 3 points a game, right? Exactly. Yeah. It's nothing major there. Like, I don't expect Frank Anselm. You're basically expecting, if you think they're going to go over 6.5, you're expecting 5 points out of Symir and then 4 points somewhere scattered between Jesse and Benny, which again doesn't sound like a Herculean effort, but with the way that the bench has contributed from a scoring standpoint, yeah, that is somewhat of a Herculean effort. So it is a little frustrating in that regard. 6.5 is just such a small number.
It is.
But it's a justifiably small number too. Like you cannot discount that either. I'll take the over. Just because there is blowout potential in this game too. And when that happens, you never know. Like, let's say Patty Casey gets in. That's a bench point if he were to get a bucket at the end of the game. So I will take Syracuse to get the over of that 6.5 for bench points. All right, when we come back, we'll get into the KenPom number as well as the total that is projected in this game and tell you where we sit on that figure. But first, it's the new year, and that means New Year's resolutions. And if you're trying to get fit or want to eat healthier, Built Bar needs to be a part of that plan. Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes even better than a candy bar, and it makes it so much easier to stick to your resolution because you'll want to eat it since it tastes so good. The bars are covered in 100% chocolate, and here are the health figures on it. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Plus, the best part about Built Bars is that they've got a variety of flavors to choose from, whether it is our favorite on the show, the peanut butter brownie, the coconut almond, the raspberry cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and so many more. Plus, they're always coming out with new limited time flavors as well. So check out Built.com often to see what's new on the site. And right now, when you go to Built.com, use our promo code LOCKED15 and you will get 15% off your order. Again, that's locked and the number 15 to get 15% off your order. Use that promo code and you can get a nice little deal when you buy some Built Bars at Built.com. All right, so the KenPom number in this game, they are projecting a 78-70 victory for Syracuse at home this weekend against a reeling Louisville team that's lost 4 straight, albeit a very tough 4-game stretch when you look at it. Home against Notre Dame, at Virginia, and then home against Duke, and then home against Carolina in a game where they really got hosed in overtime. But this is a reeling Louisville team nonetheless. And you look at the last 8 games for them in reality. The only win that they have is a home victory against BC. They started ACC play 4-0 and have since dropped 7 of their last 8. So just kind of goes to show you the state of affairs in Louisville right now, not looking good, although they did build up some cachet early on, but not a tournament team right now. And probably not going to get there with the coaching change with Mike Peggs and all that stuff. But when you look at this team, an 8-point discrepancy right now seems a little high.
Yeah.
For me, that's where I'm sitting.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting because the 2 games that Chris Mack has not been on the sideline, they've actually fared pretty well, right? They lost to Duke at home.
Yeah.
And Duke closed that game on, I believe, a 14-5 run. It was tied 60-60. Then Duke won the game. From there, UNC was in overtime, a 7-point loss. But we talked about how sort of a ref show at the end that was sort of taken out of Louisville's hands there. So that's something Jim Boeheim brought up. Like, he's always going to pump up the opponents. But he seems to think that since Chris Mack left, he was like, look, they were playing really bad before he left. But now it's hard to really nag on their 2 losses coming in since he's left because they've actually played decent. But I still look at all their metrics and I look at their stats, and the fact that Malik Williams is a question mark, that to me determines this game. And they have a very deep, very balanced roster. 10 players right now are averaging between 5 and 10 points per game, which is staggering. Like, they will get a lot of bench points in this game. Last game, they had 44 bench points. Malik Williams is their leading scorer, though. He's the 3rd best rebounder in the league. He's a guy that's given Syracuse fits, and he missed the UNC game. It was announced as a 1-game suspension. Jim Boeheim seems to think that it's going to be a longer suspension than that. So he's the question mark for me. If he's out of this game, I think Syracuse could cover.
Yeah, I'm with you. 8's a lot for a team that isn't very good. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like 8 points is a lot. I do think Syracuse wins the game. I just don't think it'll be by 8+ points. So I'm going to take Syracuse to not cover in this game, but I'll take them to win this game. In terms of the total, you do the quick math there. That has 148 for you. Another pretty tall number. Syracuse shattered that in the last game, but where do you sit on the total of 148?
Yeah, I do think I'm with you. They're probably not going to cover 8 points if I had to guess, but I would say I'd be pretty shocked if Syracuse lost this game. It's just the number is too big for me. If it was 3 or 4.
Saturday, should be a good crowd on hand. You're playing better basketball against a reeling team.
Right. And I think it's, you have to play well to win the game. Louisville has had our number a little bit in the past. I guess we have not played them since pre-COVID, which is pretty amazing. Like, Elijah Hughes was on the team the last time Syracuse.
That was the last projected game of that season. Syracuse was supposed to face Louisville in that.
Oh, right.
What was that 2020 ACC tournament?
Yep. So, and we did, I think, 2 Louisville preview podcasts last year, never actually resulted in a Louisville game because there was a lot of last minute cancelizations on their end from COVID, which was frustrating. But the last time we played them was a 90-66 drubbing at the Yum Center. That was a tough scene. And that's a game where Jim Boeheim kind of went off post-game on KenPom. And we had a fun episode that night, but not fun in the sense that Syracuse was trending well as a program. I would say over-under, I'll take the over because it's at home. And these defenses aren't very good. And I don't know. I think it could play out kind of like the NC State, the Clemson game, the Wake game, some of these recent ACC games when Syracuse gets going. I think that favors Syracuse. Make it a high-scoring game because most of those games they're winning this year.
Yeah, if you look at the sort of the KenPom breakdown of the Louisville offense and defense, this is a team that's terrible offensively, and they're not great defensively, but they're definitely better defensively than they are offensively. Offensively, they rank 175th. Defensively, they rank 89th. So this is a team that Syracuse should be able to score on, and the defense may be able to hold its own against too. So that's
and I kind of view all these games going forward as if you don't play pressure and you don't have a good defense, Syracuse is probably in a good spot, at least in the conference, because all these teams are kind of similar.
Too.
Yeah, that's just the nature of, I think, how it's trending, because if it's a high-scoring game, Syracuse has shot makers. Now, you could just have an off shooting night. We've seen that too, but I feel like they've been trending well. They're at home. They'll probably continue to shoot well.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you on that. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for our Louisville preview here. We will be back with you on Monday to break down everything that we saw in this game, as well as get you ready for the week ahead for Syracuse and the stretch that is coming up shortly. We kind of alluded to it. In 2 weeks, there's going to be an epic stretch for Syracuse where it's going to feel like they're an NBA team. They are going to have 5 games in 10 days. So we will prep you on all that stuff. That is to look forward to down the road. So for Tim, I'm Tyler. Everyone, have a great weekend, and we will talk to you guys next week.